Good Sunday morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. John North here. I'm the moderator this morning. John Becker is away. Most of the time, as you know, when you tune in, we have governors, mayors, congressmen, legislators, you name it. There's one branch of government we typically don't get to hear from, and that is the judicial branch. I might say it's one of the most important lately. It certainly has been with the last few years that we've seen. We've got two gentlemen who serve in the judiciary. They are criminal court judges here in Knox County. I'm pleased to introduce for you Judge Steve Sword. Welcome, Your Honor.
Good morning, John. Thanks for having us.
Yes, sir. It's my pleasure. And Judge Hector Sanchez. Judge, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We look forward to conversing with you, and we think you'll learn a few things, too, from these two gentlemen. But let me introduce the panelists before we get going. I think you know their names. We have Susan Richardson-Williams, who is a Republican and runs her own PR company.
Good morning, John.
And sitting to her right is Don Bosch. He's a defense attorney and a Democrat. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. Glad to have the Becker upgrade this morning.
Well, he would not agree with that, but I appreciate that. We really do appreciate it, gentlemen. I'm sincere when I say I've covered the courts for a long time. The judiciary is maybe the mystery branch of government. A lot of people don't understand it very well. That's unfortunate because it's so profoundly important. And so we are glad that you're here to sort of talk a little about it. We know there are some things you cannot talk about. You are prohibited from talking about specific cases. We get that. I understand it. I'm in your courtrooms anyway, so I already sort of know those cases. But I did want to ask just an opening general question. And it's this. I'm just curious, when you step onto the bench every morning, when you walk into that courtroom, and I'm there often and I watch you, I'm just kind of wondering, and you sit down and you look out into the courtroom, what's going through your mind? What do you see? And Judge, let me start with you, Judge Sword.
You know, I'm getting ready to start my 12th year of doing this, and I remember distinctly the first time I walked into the courtroom to begin a docket. I was looking out and I was wondering, why is everybody looking at me? And then I realized, because they're waiting for me to do something. And you know, some of that awe really hasn't disappeared. You know, when I step into the courtroom, the first thought that I have is I've been called to do this job, and I owe it to not only these parties, but to the citizens to do it well and to the best of my ability. So that's usually what's going through my mind.
Pretty sacred duty, really.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, for me, it's a personal calling, but you know, our constitutions, the state constitution and federal constitution, have both instilled in judges that duty to make sure that the judicial branch is operating under the parameters of what it's limited to.
Judge Sanchez, you've been on the bench now, I think we were talking, it's about 9 months?
It's been about 9 months. I got appointed September the 28th, 2022.
Terrific. So I've ducked in your courtroom and sat in the benches several times. You look pretty comfortable there. I'm just kind of curious, as you're walking in, you're a former prosecutor, as is Judge Sword. What's going through your mind as you sort of, you know, bang us into session?
I think I would kind of echo Judge Sword there. There's a lot of responsibility. I want to ensure, again, I'm doing my part in justice, and that justice is attained in every case that I'm involved with, and that being every case in the docket. So I take it extremely important, take it very seriously, and it's just an honor to serve in that capacity.
Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, well, you were both assistant DAs. How did that prepare you to be a judge? I mean, your criminal court, I know you probably had a lot of that as an assistant DA, but what kind of skills did you take from being an assistant DA into the courtroom? Hector, I'll start with you.
I think just trial experience generally. I was in a unit that tried cases as an assistant DA, violent crimes against persons, mostly homicide cases, and that, I think, prepared me in a way that I wasn't really aware of. When I got appointed, I was pretty concerned. I didn't get the benefit of going to what they call baby judges school. One day I was an assistant DA, and the governor called, and the next day I was a criminal court judge. So I had to ask Judge Sword a lot of questions. I still do, and I'm very happy and honored to have him as my mentor, really, and Judge Scott Green as well. But I was kind of blown away about how much I already knew about the process, not thinking about it from the perspective of a judge, but just my time as an assistant DA.
Yeah. And you, Judge?
For me, I'm sure we'll talk about my juvenile background in a little bit, but I started out 9 years. My first 9 years as a prosecutor was in juvenile court, and it's really a different mindset there. And so I learned how to be a prosecutor with this idea of I'm going in not to seek the harshest punishment I can get or convict with the highest charge I can get, but went into those cases to figure out what has happened to this child, what can we do to steer them in a different direction, and it was very much a team approach. And that never really has left me through my years prosecuting as an adult and certainly as a judge. One of the things I'm thinking about is what good can I do for the community in this case? Not only for that defendant, if they have addiction issues or mental health issues to address those, but how can I help these victims' families to get through this? What policy decisions can I make as the senior judge and currently the presiding judge to make the system work better for the people? And so I definitely kept that approach from juvenile court as kind of a team mentality of how can we achieve justice and also improve our community.
So it's interesting Susan brings up that you're both former ADAs, and I might add this will be probably the only time in my career I get to question you versus the other way around.
Let's hope.
But yeah, it'd be fun to do it again. But do you think that there is a balance or a fairness problem? And both of you all, first of all, from the onset, I will say, practicing before both of you and being friends with both of you, that you both are fair. I may disagree with you once in a while, but that's the nature of the system. But the fact that there are no defense lawyers, absent Judge Green having a very brief period of time as a defense lawyer, but most of his career as a prosecutor, is that a problem with the system, or at least a perceived problem of balance? Judge Sanchez, I'll start with you.
I don't think so necessarily. I think once you undertake and understand what the role of a judge is, it really doesn't matter what your background is. You're not an advocate for any particular position as a judge. You are a neutral and detached magistrate who enters judgment based on the law and the evidence. Once you understand that role, it really makes the function of being a judge, the ability to understand it and take on that task a bit easier. So it certainly did for me.
But you certainly heard the phrase used before, the judge is just a prosecutor in a robe. And with some cases, and again, we don't see that from you two. And so, Judge Sword, I'll ask you, how do you perceive that? And is there something maybe we can do to foster, a little more balance, I suppose, in benches as they develop? And you and I talked yesterday, and we need another criminal court judge in this community.
Yeah,
Should that come from the defense bar?
I certainly understand that that perception that this person was a career prosecutor before he came out, and one of the ways I've combated that is I've been very attentive to my mindset. I'm reading a book right now by a guy named Kahneman, and it talks about noise, and one of the things that he's focusing on is judges when they have bias, and then this noise, these things that are distracting us that affect the decisions that we're making. And so I think about those things. I think about, am I looking at this case in my old capacity as a prosecutor, or am I able to set that aside? And we all have bad days, and so I'm very attuned to what has just happened in the courtroom. Did a very difficult case just happen and maybe has put me off my game a little bit? And if so, I've been doing it long enough that I can recognize I need to take a recess. And I think the lawyers learn to respect the judge. Like, you know what, he's wanting to take the time to consider the arguments that I made. And that's part of it too, is I've got the advantage of Judge Sanchez. I've been there for over a decade now, and so some folks certainly know to understand how I'm approaching cases and learn to trust me.
This is a good time, I think, for us to take a quick break and get a cup of coffee if you need it. You're watching Inside Tennessee. We're coming back with Judge Sanchez and Judge Sword.